I'm sitting here watching the map of North American agriculture being redrawn in real time, not in some distant future, not as a theoretical scenario debated in think tanks. Right now, in the last few weeks, and the speed at which this is happening should terrify anyone paying attention. Because here's what just happened. Canada, your neighbor, your closest ally, the country that shares the world's longest undefended border with the United States, just walked into Beijing, shook hands with Xi Jinping, and signed a deal that could permanently restructure the food supply chains feeding America. A deal that experts are already calling a landmark shift. A deal that was triggered almost entirely by decisions made in Washington. What I'm about to show you in the next few minutes is not speculation. This is not a doomsday scenario. This is documented, sourced, and already unfolding. And once you understand the mechanics of what just happened, you'll realize this isn't reversible. Not quickly, not cheaply, maybe not in your lifetime. Stay with me, because this is the story that changes how you see everything else happening in global trade right now. If you're new here, this is Daily Brief. We break down the geopolitical moves that mainstream media glosses over. Subscribe, hit the bell, because what I'm about to walk you through matters for your wallet, your food prices, and the strategic position of the United States for decades to come. Let's go back, not decades, just months, because this story moves fast. The seeds of this crisis were planted 6 months ago when the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian agricultural products. The stated goal was leverage, pressure Canada on trade deficits and border security. Simple enough, right? Except what it actually did was something entirely different. It didn't pressure Canada into compliance. It pushed Canada into the arms of Beijing. And here's what nobody told you. Canada was already in a squeeze. On one side, American tariffs slamming shut the southern market. On the other side, China had been escalating its own trade war with Ottawa. As reported by CBC News, in March 2025, Beijing imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian canola oil, canola meal, and peas, along with 25% tariffs on pork and seafood. Then, in August of that same year, China added an additional 76% tariff on canola seed. Canadian farmers were getting hit from both sides simultaneously. Warehouses full of canola, buyers evaporating, margins collapsing, businesses folding. So when Prime Minister Mark Carney got on a plane to Beijing in January 2026, the first Canadian Prime Minister to visit China since 2017, he wasn't going there from a position of ideological comfort. He was going there because he had no choice. When your largest trading partner starts treating you like an adversary, you find new partners. That's not weakness. That's basic economic survival. Wait, stop there. Read that again. The first Canadian Prime Minister in nearly a decade to visit China, and he went there not as a diplomatic formality, but to sign a deal, a real one, with real numbers, with real consequences. Here's what was signed. Announcement number 1. Canada opened its market to Chinese electric vehicles, 49,000 vehicles per year at a tariff rate of just 6.1%. That's down from the 100% tariff that was in place under the previous government. And as reported by Global News, that number is set to grow to 70,000 vehicles within 5 years, with at least half being vehicles priced under $35,000. In exchange, China committed to dropping its canola seed tariff from 84% down to approximately 15% by March 1st. Canada's agriculture minister confirmed to reporters that within days of the announcement, a Chinese importer had already placed an order for 60,000 metric tons of canola seed. 60,000 tons, instantly. That is how starved Chinese buyers were for Canadian supply, and how fast these relationships can lock in when the door opens. Received. That's announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, and this one is the part almost nobody is talking about. This deal is not just about cars and canola. What Carney and Xi signed in Beijing is described by both sides as a strategic partnership. According to a statement released by China's state-run Xinhua agency, the two nations pledged to restart high-level economic and financial dialogue, boost trade and investment, and deepen cooperation in agriculture, oil, gas, and green energy. Carney said during the Beijing press conference that Canada is planning to double its energy grid over the next 15 years, and that there are opportunities for Chinese investment in offshore wind. He confirmed Canada is scaling up LNG exports targeting 50 million tons per year, destined for Asian markets by 2030. Let that sink in. Inc. Canada isn't just selling canola to China. It is building the infrastructure, the pipelines, the port capacity, the logistics networks for a long-term energy and agricultural partnership with Beijing. Once Chinese capital flows into Canadian infrastructure, once that investment is embedded, the relationship doesn't just deepen, it becomes structural. And structural relationships don't unwind over a few phone calls from Washington. Received. That's announcement number 2. Announcement number 3. And this one kept me up. In Beijing, a reporter asked Carney directly whether China has now become a more predictable partner than the United States. His answer, on record, in public, in Beijing, was this. In terms of the way our relationship has progressed in recent months with China, it is more predictable, and you see results coming from that. The Prime Minister of Canada, publicly, in China, saying that the Chinese Communist Party is more predictable than democratic America. That is not a diplomatic slip. That is a strategic declaration, and the international audience heard it loud and clear. Received. That's announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what's actually happening behind the curtain, because that's where this story gets truly explosive. Think about the players on this chessboard. Carney is not naive. He spent decades at Goldman Sachs and as governor of the Bank of England. He doesn't sign landmark deals impulsively. When he walked into that room with Xi Jinping, he was not just negotiating a tariff reduction on canola. He was negotiating the future orientation of the Canadian economy. He was telling Beijing and Washington that Canada is no longer a captive market, that it has options, that it will use them. And China understood this immediately. Beijing is not buying Canadian canola because it suddenly developed a taste for it. China has a food security problem. Feeding 1.4 billion people is an existential priority for the Communist Party. Locking in long-term, stable agricultural supply from a top-tier producer like Canada is a strategic win that no amount of military posturing could achieve. As analyzed by Trivium China and quoted in Al Jazeera, Beijing sees this partnership as a way to fundamentally reshape the geopolitical landscape of North American agriculture, while the United States voluntarily distances itself from one of its greatest strategic advantages. Meanwhile, in Washington, silence. No agricultural relief package, no consultation with Canadian counterparts, no transition plan, just tariffs and tweets. Here's what nobody in Washington seems to understand. You cannot rebuild these supply chains on a timeline that matches an election cycle. Canada is the world's top exporter of canola. It controls roughly 15% of global wheat trade. American grain processors, and especially in Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota, have been blending Canadian spring wheat with domestic crops for 40 years. That's not a preference. That's infrastructure. That's biology. You cannot replace Canadian spring wheat overnight with Australian or Argentine supply. The logistics don't exist. The variety profiles don't match. The buyer specifications were written around North American integration. And right now, this season, this spring, Canadian farmers are making planting decisions. If Chinese buyers are offering premium prices and multi-year contracts for canola and wheat, while American buyers are caught in tariff uncertainty, where does production go? This isn't theory. Scott Peters, a pork and canola producer in Saskatchewan, told CBC News that he had already decided to seed less canola this spring because of the trade war. Now, with the China deal signed, that math changes. Chinese buyers are back, American buyers are not. Once those planting decisions tip toward Asian markets, once logistics networks reorient toward Pacific shipping instead of cross-border trucking, once Chinese state-owned enterprises invest in Canadian grain elevators and port facilities, the direction of that supply chain doesn't reverse easily. It doesn't reverse at all without massive capital, massive political will, and years of relationship rebuilding. We have a historical parallel that should terrify every American strategist. When the United States imposed a grain embargo against the Soviet Union in the 1980s, American farmers lost Soviet buyers. The Soviets simply found new suppliers: Argentina, Brazil, Australia. And some of those customer relationships never came back. Not fully, not ever. We are watching that exact dynamic replay right now, except this time, America isn't embargoing a rival. It's alienating a neighbor. And that neighbor is redirecting its agricultural economy toward the largest food importer on earth, If you're watching this from Montana, North Dakota, Kansas, or Minnesota, listen carefully. Your economy sits at the center of this story. The grain processing operations in your states depend on integrated North American supply chains that are fracturing in real time. The trucking companies running cross-border agricultural routes are already reporting volume drops of 40 to 60%. These are not corporations with diversified revenue streams. These are family operations running the same routes for decades. When those volumes collapse, those businesses don't pivot. They close, and those specialized logistics capabilities don't come back. A grain processing facility, I can't name it because its owners fear regulatory retaliation, has been buying Canadian spring wheat for 3 generations. 140 employees in a rural community where alternative employment barely exists. Their raw material costs went up 28% after the tariffs hit. They cannot pass all of that on to customers without losing contracts to foreign competitors. They face 2 options: absorb losses until bankruptcy or shut down and lay off everyone. This is happening right now. It is not isolated. It is the reality across the agricultural supply chain. If you're watching this and you work in food manufacturing, in agricultural logistics, in grain processing, or in farm equipment, this affects you directly. The Angus Reid Institute found that 65% of Canadians approve of the Carney-Shee deal. Saskatchewan and Ontario, the most directly affected provinces, largely agree it was necessary. 3 times as many Canadians call it a good deal as a bad one. Canada is not conflicted about this. Canada has made its choice. And the question now is whether Washington will respond before the supply chains reorient permanently. Subscribe to Daily Brief if you're finding this useful. We cover the moves that don't make the front page but determine the world you're waking up to tomorrow. Let's talk about where this ends, because I see 2 paths. Path 1. Washington recognizes the strategic damage being done. The Trump administration offers meaningful tariff relief on Canadian agricultural products within the next 60 days. Ottawa responds with a pause on deepening the China partnership. USMCA renegotiations, which are due this year, proceed with agricultural access guaranteed in exchange for border security commitments. Supply chain disruptions reverse slowly over 18 to 24 months. It costs both sides economically, but the integration holds. This path requires something Washington has not demonstrated in months: the ability to separate tactical tariff leverage from strategic relationship management. Path 2. No relief comes. Canadian farmers lock in multi-year contracts with Chinese buyers this spring. Chinese state investment begins flowing into Canadian infrastructure. Pacific logistics routes deepen. The USMCA review becomes a confrontation rather than a negotiation. Canada demands guaranteed market access as a condition for any deal and makes clear it has alternatives. Agricultural economists have modeled this. Research shows that if current trade disruptions persist beyond 18 months, the structural changes become permanent. We're already past 12. I'll be honest with you. I look at the signals coming out of Washington right now, and I think we're on path 2. Trump himself, when asked about the Carney-Shee deal, told reporters at the White House, and this is a quote, "That's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal." That statement from the president suggests the White House does not fully grasp what it just watched happen, or it doesn't care. Either way, the strategic consequences are the same, because here's the brutal bottom line. The United States has spent 70 years building the most productive, integrated, food-secure agricultural region in the history of civilization. The integration of Canadian and American farming, processing, logistics, and export infrastructure is a strategic asset that no rival can replicate. Not China, not the EU, not anyone. And right now, the United States is voluntarily dismantling that asset, tariff by tariff, with no clear plan, no agricultural sector consultation, and no off-ramp. China didn't invade Canada. It didn't threaten Canada. It didn't need to. It simply waited for Washington to push Canada away, then offered a better deal. And Beijing is now embedded in the agricultural supply chain of a G7 nation directly on America's northern border. The historian Walter Russell Mead once wrote that great powers don't lose influence because they are defeated. They lose it because they choose to abandon it. What we are watching in North American agriculture is not a defeat. It is a choice, and the consequences will outlast any administration. For Daily Brief, the question I want you to think about, and I want your answer in the comments, is this: Is the United States making a calculated strategic move in pressuring Canada with a clear end game that we're not seeing yet? Or are we watching a self-inflicted wound, one of the most consequential in modern American economic history, driven by short-term political logic and a fundamental misreading of how deeply integrated North American agriculture actually is? Because from where I sit, having tracked every data point, every statement, every contract, and every planting decision, this looks like the beginning of something that cannot be undone quickly. And the grocery bill you pay this time next year will be part of the proof. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this made you think differently about what's happening at the border, share it. Because this story deserves more attention than it's getting.